The beginning of a weak ship, the emergence of the Empire. The ship was weak, weak in every sense. It drifted in the vast emptiness of space, its engines barely functioning, and its hull cracked in several places. Once, it had been a symbol of hope for the Empire, a proud vessel known as the Aegis. But now, it was nothing more than a relic of the past, abandoned and forgotten. The Aegis had once been part of the Empire's strongest fleet, a shining beacon of power. Now, it was a joke. Its crew was made up of outcasts and misfits, soldiers who had been dishonorably discharged, scientists whose research had been dismissed, and engineers who had failed in their previous missions. They all had one thing in common. They were on this ship because they had nowhere else to go. The Empire no longer cared about them. And the ship was slowly dying in space, neglected by everyone. Captain Kendra Riles stood on the bridge, looking out through the cracked windows of the Aegis. The stars outside were distant, cold. The once vibrant systems that ran through the ship were dim, flickering, barely keeping the ship alive. The controls on the bridge were worn, the screens scratched, and the buttons ticky with age. It felt as if the ship was about to give up on them too. Kendra sighed deeply. She had always hoped that the Aegis could be more than this. She had always believed it had potential. But now, standing there, she wasn't so sure anymore. "Any luck with the engines, Mara?" Kendra called over her shoulder. Mara, the lead engineer, looked up from her workstation, where she was surrounded by broken tools and half-repaired circuits. She shook her head, frustration written all over her face. "No, Captain. The engines are shot. We can't get more than 20% power out of them. At this rate, we're just a floating target." Kendra turned away from her, glancing at the rest of the crew. They were all hard at work, trying to salvage whatever they could from the broken remains of the ship, but it was clear to her that they were running out of time. The Aegis wasn't going to last much longer. But what could they do? They were stuck in deep space, far from any supply base or friendly territory. The Empire had cut off all communication. No one would come to their rescue. This was the end for them. She knew it. The crew knew it. The Aegis was a dying ship. There was no hope left. Kendra's thoughts were interrupted by a voice from the communication panel. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal," said Lieutenant Jace, the communications officer. "It's faint, but it's coming from an unknown source." "Put it through," Kendra ordered. The speaker crackled, and a garbled voice came through. "Need help. Ship damaged." The message was barely audible, but it was clear enough. Someone was in trouble. Kendra's heart raced. Could this be a chance for them to find some help? The Aegis was weak, but maybe, just maybe, they could assist someone else in need. Perhaps this distress signal was their chance to prove they were not completely worthless. But the crew had no resources. They had no power, no strength to fight back if needed. Yet it was a call for help. Kendra couldn't ignore it. "Can you locate the source?" she asked. Lieutenant Jace adjusted the controls, trying to clear up the static. After a few tense moments, he spoke again. "It's coming from the Shalian system, just beyond the nebula fields." Kendra frowned. The Shalian system was on the fringe of known space. It was an area filled with dangerous asteroid belts, ion storms, and unpredictable gravitational anomalies. It was a place where ships often disappeared. It wasn't exactly the safest place to go, but it was a destination. "Set a course," Kendra said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty she felt inside. "Captain, are you sure?" Mara asked, looking up from her station. "Our ship is barely holding together. If we go out there, we could end up in even more trouble." "I know the risks," Kendra replied, "but we can't just sit here and wait to die. If someone needs help, we're the only ones close enough. We have to try. For the crew, for the Aegis." The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but they all nodded in agreement. There was nothing left to lose. They had to do something, anything, to fight back against their hopeless situation. The ship's engines roared to life, the faint hum vibrating through the walls. It was a weak start, but it was something. Slowly, the Aegis turned and began its slow, shaky journey toward the Shalian system. With each passing minute, the ship seemed to groan in protest, but the crew pushed forward. As they navigated through the depths of space, a strange feeling began to fill the air. The Aegis wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a symbol of the crew's determination to survive, even when everything seemed lost. They were going to answer the distress signal. They were going to try, no matter the cost. And maybe, just maybe, they would find the strength they needed to turn the tide. An unexpected hope. The journey to the Shalian system was slow, the ship creaking and groaning with every turn. Despite their best efforts, the Aegis was struggling, its engines barely pushing it forward. But there was no turning back now. The crew, though tired and uncertain, were focused. Every person on board knew this could be their only chance to prove themselves. They had to make it count. Kendra stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the dim stars outside. She wasn't sure what they'd find when they reached the source of the distress signal, but she knew one thing. The Aegis couldn't go on much longer in its current state. It was more than just a ship. It had become a reflection of the crew themselves. Broken, but still fighting. "Captain." Mara's voice broke through Kendra's thoughts. She turned to find her engineer looking up from the control panel with a worried expression. "We're almost out of fuel. If we don't find something soon, we won't be able to make it back." Kendra nodded grimly. The situation was getting dire. They needed more than just hope. They needed a miracle. But what else could they do? They had no choice but to press on. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered, and a loud hum filled the air. Kendra's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the usual malfunction. Something felt different. She looked around, seeing the same confusion on her crew's faces. "What is that?" Jace asked from his station, eyes wide as the hum grew louder. Before Kendra could respond, the bridge door slid open, and a figure stepped inside. A new arrival. The crew froze, unsure of who it was or how they had gotten on board. The stranger was a woman, dressed in worn, but clearly advanced engineering gear. She was tall, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through the ship's layers of rust and neglect. "I'm Dr. Lyra Volcan," she said, her voice steady and calm. "And I think I can help you." Kendra blinked in surprise. "Help us? How?" "I've been tracking you," Lyra replied. "I know the Aegis's history. The Empire abandoned you. But I can see the potential here. This ship still has power that you're not using, and I know how to unlock it." The crew exchanged glances. Lyra's confidence was unsettling, yet strangely reassuring. How could she know so much about the Aegis? They hadn't shared any of their technical secrets with anyone outside the crew. But before anyone could voice their doubts, Lyra spoke again. "I've studied ancient technologies. There's a power source on this ship that you haven't tapped into yet. If you let me work, I can make this ship a force to be reckoned with." Kendra narrowed her eyes. Could it be true? Was there really something more to this ship than they had known? They had all assumed the Aegis was a lost cause, but now Lyra was offering a glimmer of hope. Still, Kendra couldn't help but feel a twinge of skepticism. Who was this woman? And why was she so certain? "Why should we trust you?" Kendra asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Lyra's eyes softened. "Because I'm just like you," she said quietly. "I've been abandoned by the Empire too. I've had my own battles, but I refuse to let this ship, or any of you, fade into nothingness. I've seen what humans can do when they push past the limits, and you can do more than you think." The words hung in the air for a long moment, and Kendra found herself considering them. Could Lyra truly be the answer they were looking for? They had nothing left to lose. "All right," Kendra finally said, her voice calm but decisive. "Do what you need to do, but we need results, and we need them quickly." Lyra gave a small, confident smile. "I'm not here to waste time." With that, she moved swiftly to the engineering bay. The crew watched her go, each person filled with a mix of curiosity and hope. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger was their chance to turn things around. As Lyra began working on the ship's systems, the crew was filled with anticipation. Kendra couldn't help but wonder, was this the turning point they'd all been waiting for? Could this stranger truly unlock the ship's hidden power and make it unstoppable? For the first time in a long while, Kendra felt a flicker of optimism. But there was still much to be done. They couldn't afford to fail. The next few hours passed in a blur. Lyra worked tirelessly, her fingers moving over the ship's controls with a precision and knowledge that impressed even the most experienced engineers. The ship seemed to respond to her touch, its systems slowly coming to life, as if it were waking up from a long slumber. It wasn't long before the first signs of change became apparent. The ship's engines roared with newfound energy, and the lights flickered to full brightness. The Aegis was alive again, but it wasn't the same ship it had been before. Lyra stood back and looked at her work with a satisfied smile. It's done. The power is yours. The crew looked at each other, a mixture of disbelief and excitement on their faces. The Aegis was no longer just a weak, abandoned ship. It had been transformed into something more, a vessel that had the potential to change everything. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the crew of the Aegis began to believe. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were something more. They were ready for what came next. Humans unlocked the power. The crew stood in stunned silence as the Aegis seemed to pulse with new life. Lyra's hands were steady as she worked, but there was a fire in her eyes. She had unlocked something incredible, something the Aegis had hidden for decades. Kendra stood at the front of the bridge, feeling the hum of power beneath her feet. The ship had never felt this alive. The once dying engines now roared with purpose. The ship's control systems were operating at full capacity, and even the weapons systems had powered up, their energy shields flickering into place. The Aegis was transforming right before their eyes, and it felt almost unreal. "What did you do?" Jace asked, his voice full of wonder. "I didn't do much," Lyra said with a modest smile. The ship was always capable of more. The technology is ancient, but it was locked away. The Empire didn't understand what it had. But now, it's ours to control. Kendra's mind raced. Could it really be true? The Aegis was a relic, a ship thought to be outdated and useless. But now, it was something entirely different. She could feel the potential, the raw power surging through the ship's veins. This wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a weapon. The crew had watched their lives slip through their fingers, but now everything had changed. Mara rushed to the engineering station, eyes wide as she examined the data. "Captain, the energy levels are off the charts. The ship is at full power. It's stronger than anything we could have imagined," Mara said, her voice full of awe. The Aegis had become something more than just a survivor. It had become a force to be reckoned with. But with that power came new risks. Lyra's warning echoed in Kendra's mind. "It's not without its dangers," Lyra had said earlier. "The power we've unlocked is unstable. If we push it too far, the ship might fall apart." But for now, the Aegis was humming with energy, ready for whatever came next. Kendra knew they couldn't waste time. They had to act fast before the enemy arrived. "We've got incoming," Jace shouted suddenly, his hands flying over the communication console. Kendra's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "A fleet," Jace replied, voice tight with tension. "A massive fleet. It's headed directly for us, and they're not friendly. We don't have much time before they reach us." Kendra's mind raced. The Aegis was now a powerful ship, but was it powerful enough to face a fleet? She had no idea who the enemy was, but she knew that they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. "Lyra," Kendra said, turning toward her, "we need to be ready. Can we use the ship's new power to defend ourselves?" Lyra nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. But we'll have to be smart. The ship can handle it, but we need to strategize. We can't just rush in blindly." The crew gathered around the map table, quickly analyzing the situation. The enemy fleet was large, far too large for the Aegis to face head-on without a plan. Kendra's mind raced, trying to come up with a strategy. They were outnumbered, but they now had an edge. The Aegis was a powerhouse, and they had Lyra, whose knowledge of the ship's new capabilities might be the key to survival. "We'll need to use hit-and-run tactics," Lyra suggested, her voice steady. "We can't afford to get caught in direct combat. But with the ship's new speed and firepower, we can strike fast and hard." Kendra nodded, turning to her crew. "Prepare the weapons. We're going to show them that the Aegis isn't as weak as they think." The tension in the air was palpable as the crew sprang into action. They worked in perfect synchronization, their movements swift and efficient. Mara ran through the engine diagnostics, ensuring everything was functioning at peak capacity. Jace coordinated the communications, ensuring the ship's shields and weapons were online. Lyra moved to the engineering bay, adjusting the ship's energy flow, preparing it for combat. Kendra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation on her shoulders. This wasn't just about the Aegis. This was about proving the crew's worth, about showing that even when everything seemed hopeless, they could rise to the challenge. The enemy fleet was getting closer. Time was running out. "We're ready," Mara said, her voice sharp with determination. "Then let's make sure they know who we are," Kendra said, her gaze steely as she turned to the front of the bridge. With the press of a button, the Aegis surged forward, its engines roaring to life with a newfound intensity. The ship was no longer the weak, broken vessel it had been. It was unstoppable, a force that could challenge anything the galaxy threw at it. The battle was about to begin. Transformation begins. The Aegis shot through space like a beast awakened. Its once weakened engines now pulsed with energy, the power of the newly unlocked systems sending a surge of adrenaline through the crew. They had no idea how long the ship could maintain its newfound strength, but they were going to make every second count. "We're entering the outer perimeter of the enemy fleet," Jace said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "They're closing in fast." Kendra stood at the helm, her hands gripping the controls tightly. Her mind was racing, thinking through the plan Lyra had helped devise. It was risky, but it was the only chance they had. They would have to outsmart the enemy, not just outfight them. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Kendra ordered. "Activate the shields to maximum. Let's show them what the Aegis can really do." The crew went to work in perfect sync. Mara monitored the power grid, her eyes scanning the fluctuating readings on the screen. Lyra was in the engineering bay, making adjustments to the ship's systems on the fly, fine-tuning the energy flow to keep everything running smoothly. Suddenly, the Aegis rocked, its hull shuddering as the first salvo of enemy fire struck its shields. The ship groaned, but the shields held. For a moment, it felt like the Aegis was about to crumble under the force, but then something unexpected happened. The ship seemed to adapt. The shields absorbed the energy, redirecting it and strengthening the ship's defenses. "That's it," Mara exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. "The ship's systems are compensating. The new power is stabilizing." The Aegis was no longer just a ship. It was a living entity, feeding off its own energy and adapting to the enemy's attacks. It was becoming stronger with every passing second. Kendra couldn't believe it. For so long, they had been stuck in a losing battle against time. But now, they had something more. The ship had potential, and they were about to unleash it. "We've got their attention," Jace called out, watching as the enemy ship started to change course, targeting the Aegis with a renewed focus. They weren't prepared for the sudden shift in power, and they were beginning to make mistakes. "Now's our chance," Kendra said, her voice tight with anticipation. "Mara, lock in on their weakest ship. Jace, get me their coordinates." Mara quickly accessed the targeting systems, her fingers flying over the controls. "Locked in. We've got the signal." Kendra nodded, her mind sharp as she gave the command. "Fire." The Aegis's cannons hummed to life, unleashing a barrage of energy that cut through the void of space. A powerful blast struck the enemy ship with pinpoint accuracy, piercing its shields and punching through its hull. In an instant, the enemy vessel exploded, sending debris flying in all directions. "Direct hit," Jace said, his voice full of astonishment. "We've taken out one of their lead ships." The crew erupted in a mix of shock and exhilaration. They had done it. The Aegis wasn't just holding its ground anymore. It was fighting back. It was showing the enemy what humans could do when pushed to their limits. But the battle was far from over. The remaining enemy ships were regrouping, their weapons charging for another strike. The Aegis was still outnumbered, and the damage from the initial hit was starting to show. But something in the air had changed. The crew wasn't afraid anymore. They had a weapon, a chance to survive. "We can do this," Lyra said, her voice steady as she appeared back on the bridge. "We've awakened the ship. Now, let's see how much it can really take." The Aegis shook again, this time from multiple impacts. The hull groaned, but the shields held strong. Kendra knew they couldn't take much more of this. The ship needed to be pushed even further, but they had to be careful. They had to unlock everything they could without risking it all. "Bring the engines up to full power," Kendra commanded. "We're going all in." Mara hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Understood. This is going to be risky." The Aegis's engines roared louder than ever before, pushing the ship to its maximum speed. It shot forward, dodging enemy fire with agility they hadn't known the ship was capable of. The ship had transformed from a sitting duck to a lightning-fast predator, capable of outmaneuvering anything in its path. "We're in range for another strike," Jace said, his hands flying over the console. "They won't know what hit them." "Fire," Kendra commanded. The Aegis unleashed another barrage, this time hitting multiple enemy ships with pinpoint precision. The blasts were devastating, tearing through shields and vaporizing entire sections of enemy vessels. The enemy fleet was beginning to fall apart, their once coordinated attacks now fragmented and disorganized. Kendra's heart pounded in her chest. They were doing it. The Aegis had gone from a broken, dying ship to a true powerhouse. The tide of the battle had turned, and it was all thanks to the crew's determination and Lyra's brilliant understanding of the ship's hidden potential. "We've got them on the run," Jace said, his voice filled with awe. "They're retreating." The enemy fleet, once so sure of their superiority, was now scattering in every direction, retreating to save their ships from the onslaught of the Aegis. It had been a hard-fought battle, but the humans aboard the ship had shown that no matter how weak something might appear, with the right knowledge and determination, it could become unstoppable. The Aegis had been transformed, not just in its technology, but in the spirit of the crew. They were no longer the outcasts, the misfits. They were warriors. And this was just the beginning. The ultimate test. The Aegis hung in space, its weapons still glowing faintly from the recent battle. The enemy fleet had retreated, but Kendra knew this wasn't over. Something didn't feel right. There was an unsettling calm in the air, a silence that spoke volumes. The Aegis had won the battle, but Kendra had learned long ago that victory in space was never as simple as it seemed. "We've driven them off for now, but I don't trust it," Kendra said, her voice sharp. She looked at her crew, her eyes scanning each face. "Something's coming. I can feel it." Mara was at the engineering station, her hands flying over the controls as she ran diagnostic checks. "Captain, the ship's systems are stable, but we've sustained some damage. We need to make repairs before we can engage again." "Agreed," Kendra replied, nodding. "But we don't have much time. Let's get ready for whatever's next." Jace looked up from his console, his brow furrowed. "Captain, I'm picking up a massive energy signature. It's coming fast. This isn't a standard ship. This is something else entirely." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Aegis had faced one enemy fleet, but this felt different. The energy signature was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was too powerful, too focused. Kendra felt the weight of the moment. Get us moving now. We don't have a second to lose. The Aegis surged forward, its engines roaring with renewed energy. It was still the same ship, the one that had been abandoned and broken. But now, it was a weapon, a force capable of challenging even the most formidable threats in the galaxy. They had just proven it, but could they face what was coming? "We're closing in on the source," Jace said, his voice tense. "It's a massive ship, bigger than anything we've ever seen. I'm not sure we can stand against it." Kendra's heart raced, but she didn't show it. She had to remain calm. They had come so far, and there was no turning back now. "Mara, prepare the weapons. Lyra, we need everything we've got. Can we push the Aegis even further?" Lyra stepped forward, a serious expression on her face. "We've unlocked the ship's hidden potential, but I've pushed it to the limit. If we go any further, we risk damaging the core systems. But if that ship's coming at us, we don't have a choice." Kendra nodded. "Do it. We'll take the risk." The crew worked with urgency, their movements fast but precise. The Aegis hummed with a new electric energy, a promise of power ready to be unleashed. But as the enemy ship drew closer, Kendra's thoughts raced. Who was this enemy? What were they after? As the massive ship loomed on the horizon, Kendra's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just big, it was monstrous. The enemy ship had been built for one thing: destruction. Its size alone was enough to make even the most seasoned warriors hesitate. "We're within range," Jace said, his voice tight. "They're targeting us with heavy fire." "Evasive maneuvers," Kendra ordered, slamming her hand down on the console. "Mara, hit them with everything we've got." Full power to the forward guns. The Aegis swerved, dodging the first wave of incoming fire. The ship's advanced systems, still unfamiliar to the crew, adapted quickly, its movements fluid and precise. The enemy was firing relentlessly, but the Aegis was too fast, too unpredictable. It wasn't just surviving, it was attacking. The forward cannons erupted in a blinding flash of energy, striking the massive enemy ship with all the force the Aegis could muster. But the shots barely left a scratch. The enemy ship's shields were stronger than anything the crew had ever encountered. It was like trying to pierce a mountain with a dagger. "They've got shields like nothing I've seen before," Mara said, her voice laced with frustration. "We can't break through with standard weapons." Kendra gritted her teeth. They needed to find a way to weaken the enemy's defenses. Fast. But how? They couldn't take on a ship of that size head-on. It was too powerful, and their ammunition was limited. They needed to outsmart it. "Lyra, can we modify the ship's power flow to overload their shields?" Kendra asked, her mind racing. Lyra paused, thinking. "It's possible, but it's a risky maneuver. If we push the power core too far, we'll destabilize the ship. The Aegis will break apart before we can do any real damage." But Kendra knew they had no choice. There was no time for caution. "Do it. We'll push it to the limit." Lyra's hands flew over the controls, quickly rerouting energy from the engines into the weapon systems. The ship hummed louder, its power growing in intensity. The Aegis was no longer just a ship. It was a weapon, a living, breathing force. The next moment, the Aegis lunged forward, its cannons firing with an intensity they'd never known. This time, the shots connected, and the enemy ship's shields flickered, weakening under the onslaught. The massive ship tried to retaliate, but it was too late. The Aegis had found its opening. "Now's our chance," Kendra shouted. "Full power to the main guns. We're going for the heart of their ship." With one final explosive barrage, the Aegis struck the enemy ship's core. The explosion was cataclysmic, sending shockwaves rippling through space. The enemy ship, once a towering behemoth of destruction, was now a cloud of debris, drifting through the cold emptiness. The crew of the Aegis stood in stunned silence, their hearts racing from the intensity of the battle. The ship had done it. They had done it. They had faced the impossible and won. Kendra looked out the window, her gaze softening. They were no longer the misfits or the outcasts. They were warriors, and the Aegis had become something more than a ship. It was their triumph. It was unstoppable. Victory and new beginnings. The battle was over, but the echoes of it still hung in the air, the crew's adrenaline slowly fading as the Aegis floated victorious in the silence of space. The massive enemy ship had been reduced to nothing but debris, its once imposing presence now scattered across the dark void. The threat was gone, but what came next? Kendra stood at the bridge window, gazing at the wreckage. It was hard to believe how far they had come. Only a short while ago, they had been a broken crew on a dying ship, facing an uncertain future. Now, they were something more. The Aegis had proven itself, not just as a ship, but as a symbol of resilience, of what humans could achieve when pushed to their limits. "We did it," Jace said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was filled with awe, disbelief, and pride. Kendra turned to face the crew. "We did. But it's not over. We've proven that we're stronger than we ever realized, but we have to keep moving forward. The galaxy isn't going to wait for us to catch our breath." Mara nodded, her hands still resting on the controls. "We've got the power now, Captain. We can go anywhere, do anything. The Aegis is a weapon, a symbol. It's no longer a ship that's been left behind." Lyra, standing next to Kendra, smiled faintly. "This is only the beginning. You've unlocked the potential of the Aegis, but there's more out there. More ships like it, more power. We've only scratched the surface." Kendra's eyes narrowed as she thought about the future. The battle they had just fought was just one step. There were countless other threats in the galaxy, and many more unknowns. But one thing was certain. They were no longer weak. They were no longer a forgotten relic. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Where do we go from here?" Mara asked, her voice filled with curiosity and hope. "Wherever we want," Kendra replied, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "We've made it this far. We'll make it further. The Aegis isn't just a ship. It's a symbol of everything we are, resilient, determined, and unstoppable." Kendra turned to the crew, meeting each of their eyes. "We've been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite our story. But it's not just about us. It's about showing the galaxy that no matter how weak you might seem, no matter how broken you are, you can rise again. You can become something more. We'll show them what humanity is capable of." The Aegis hummed beneath their feet as if it, too, had heard Kendra's words and agreed. The ship was alive with energy, its systems pulsing with newfound strength. It wasn't just an old relic. It was a new beginning. A chance to explore, to fight, and to prove once and for all that the human spirit could never be crushed. As the crew settled into their duties, each of them felt the weight of the mission ahead. They weren't just repairing a ship anymore. They were forging their future. They were forging a path for humanity, one that would take them beyond the stars, into the unknown, where they would make their mark on the galaxy. Kendra looked at the stars outside once more, her mind racing with the endless possibilities. The Aegis was no longer just a ship that had been left behind. It was a ship that had been transformed by the hands of those who believed in it, by the humans who refused to give up. "We've got a long road ahead of us," Kendra said, turning back to her crew with a confident smile. "But we're ready. We've faced the impossible, and we've come out on top. Let's show the galaxy who we are." And with that, the Aegis began its journey once more, a ship reborn, a crew united, and a new chapter in humanity's legacy written in the stars.